We'll start with your name and how do you spell it, where you were born, where you're currently living, and what your zodiac sign is.
Okay. So my name is Pressman, Pressman, like you're pressing a man for information. I was born in Jakarta, Indonesia. What are the other questions?
Where are you currently living?
Where am I currently living? Richmond, Virginia, and I'm an Aquarius. Pressman is a 23-year-old person who does spoken word poetry and comedy, and tries to do the right thing. I think the reason I mainly got into comedy was because I really fell in love with telling stories and performing with spoken word poetry. And then I realized one day I'd really like it if I could make all the people I love laugh instead of cry whenever I perform. So that kind of like catapulted me into trying out stand-up for the first time, and I've been really excited about it since it started.
Shedding light on undertold stories, vanishing traditions, and humans doing cool shit. I'm Dom, and this is Exhibition.
My very specific fetish is that I really want to be murdered by whoever I'm sleeping with, which is my way of letting y'all know that I've been fucking a lot of white guys recently. Thank you. No, it's been interesting. Riding the light wave, as they call it. I feel like, as a person of color, it's a little bit exhilarating to fuck a white person, because you know it gives you the same adrenaline rush as like riding a Six Flags coaster when it's been a few too many months since their last beheading. Like, I know if I accidentally die during this, no one's really gonna be held responsible. I pay attention to all the white people who don't laugh at that joke. Because they've definitely accidentally killed someone before. Which means I'm giving them my number.
So what keeps you inspired?
I don't know, wanting to make people laugh more than anything. Like, I love telling stories, and I love having people listen. Obviously, everyone loves having people listen, but I think more than anything, every comedian just chases the laugh and chases the feeling of bringing joy to another person, even if it's only for a moment, or even if it's about something very dark and difficult to talk about. There's nothing more satisfying than the feeling of like collective catharsis when everyone in a room is laughing, and like just I remember having side-splitting laughter. In like Javanese culture, we have this ceremony when a baby is 7 months old where they do like all these things to sort of like bless them before they take their first steps on the ground, because they're not supposed to touch the ground before they're 7 months old or whatever. Otherwise, like evil spirits from the earth could like kill them and take their body or whatever. But one of the things that they do after like a flower petal bath and like helping the baby up a 7-rung ladder and helping the baby walk over like 7 plates of like brightly colored rice pudding or whatever, they put the baby in this rooster cage with a bunch of different items laid out before it. And the first item that a baby reaches for is supposed to be indicative of that baby's life path or what they end up doing in life. And I ended up reaching for 2 items at once. I reached for the notebook and the paintbrush because I just wanted to just sort of start putting 2 and 2 together. And I guess ever since then, it's always just been a matter of me finding some kind of writing or drawing utensil and putting shit to paper.
So you started doing poetry and then you switched to comedy.
Mm-hmm.
Does your poetry still show up in your comedic stand-ups?
It's funny. I have a lot of bits that I actually derived originally from poems. Most specifically, there's a bit that I do about stripping in a full nude strip club when you're on your period. So you have to shake your fully naked ass while hiding the fact you have a tampon jammed so far up your cooter you can taste the bloody cotton in your mouth. And that's literally like word for word the beginning for one of my poems about being a stripper. Or like, for example, I have a poem where I talk about dating white people and why I should probably stop. And that informed a lot of my comedy in terms of like some of the things that I said within that poem getting repeated in like some bits that I ended up doing in my sets.
How does stripping fit into the facets of your life?
It's weird because I always thought that stripping would just be sort of like a stepping stone in my life, right? Like just the thing I do to get by through college, and then I put it in my past and I forget all about it. But it's ended up informing all parts of my life in really good ways. Like before I started stripping, I was always very nervous and very awkward. I still have days where it is very present in my personality. But for the most part, stripping has forced me to learn how to be able to start a conversation with anyone, regardless of whether or not I have anything in common with them. And it's forced me to learn not only how to engage in conversation with anyone, but also how to be persuasive enough to like convince someone to spend hundreds of dollars on like a lap dance, which is it's a rhetorical skill in its own right. Like that is really a flourish of rhetoric right there, to be able to make that kind of a sales pitch. So I would say that it's given me a lot more social confidence, and a lot more ability to believe in myself, both in my argumentative skills and skills of persuasion, and also in terms of, I don't know, like my desirability as a person. It's something I've always struggled with growing up. I just didn't really feel very pretty in particular or very attractive in particular growing up. And it wasn't until college that I started maybe seeing myself as even like someone who is worthy of desire. So to have a job that like literally being desirable is the job description, like being paid to be hot on a stage in front of people, it's interesting. It's definitely not something I ever saw myself doing. But it's something I've been really grateful for in a lot of ways that I couldn't have anticipated. The best parts of the job are when you get a lot of money for very little work. The worst parts of the job are when you have to suffer fools gladly. If I had $1 for every time I had to smile and grin through some racist bullshit that was being said to me, or that was happening in the club, I probably wouldn't be stripping anymore. Like, so it's difficult dealing with that, and it definitely takes a toll on you, especially when the industry is desirability and you see how European standards of beauty and Eurocentric standards of beauty are always rewarded over others. It can be really difficult, and sometimes there are days where it seems like only white girls are making money in the club, and that can be really deeply discouraging. Granted, that changes from city to city, and I've noticed that like it's a lot more present here in Richmond than it is even when I go up to DC to dance, like just 2 hours away. Growing up for me, I grew up in a very white suburb, and a lot of times in middle school and high school, it felt like the only things you needed to really be considered pretty was to be skinny and to be white, and I was neither of those things. So I always felt very self-conscious about my body and the way that my skin looked. And I never really considered it, but when I was in middle school and high school, I was very active, and I was always out in the sun, and I was much darker than I am right now. And when I started going to college, I didn't really notice it at first, but I realized I started spending a lot more time indoors. And I never really paid attention to it until one day one of my friends was flipping through pictures of me from like middle school and high school on Facebook, trying to like find some old awkward photos to embarrass me. Spoiler alert, they're all embarrassing. But he paused on a picture of me playing Frisbee in high school, and he was like, "Hold on, is that you?" And I was like, "Yeah, like, does it not look like me?" And he's like, "I don't know, it looks like you pulled a full Michael Jackson on us." Like, and I think about that, and I'm just sort of like, I wonder if like stripping played into any of that, because I've noticed that I do make more money when I'm not as dark as I am in the summertime. it sucks because it seemed like I don't think I did it consciously, but it just kind of happened. And there are lots of moments in the club where I look at other girls' bodies, especially in Richmond, and I'm just sort of like, oh, like I would make a lot more money if I lost like 30 pounds or something. Or if my nose wasn't as wide, or if I just had more Eurocentric features in general, if my face wasn't as round. But there are other days where I look at myself in the mirror and other customers see what I see, and I make a shit ton of money, and it's fantastic. So it's really wild. It's more of a mental game than anything else. You just have to learn to believe in yourself and believe in your own desirability above all else. And it definitely gets hard sometimes, but it's one of those things where you just kind of have to keep trucking. Sorry, I feel like that answer went all over the place.
No, that was a great answer. As a POC, how can you deal with all of these microaggressions because it's so deeply rooted in everything?
You just got to joke about it. And I think that was a big thing that got me into comedy, because I was tired of writing angry poems about every microaggression that I dealt with. And I was like, you know what? Like, they're not going to listen to my poetry. Like, as much as I do love poetry, it can be kind of an echo chamber sometimes. And I think the thing I've always valued most about comedy is that, like, everyone loves to laugh. So you're going to get audience members from every walk of life. And those are the people you need to be talking to and you need to be telling your story to, because those are the people who wouldn't listen to you otherwise. And I'm not going to win all of them over. I don't believe that. I've had many sets where I've definitely upset white people with some of my jokes.
So have you found that your comedy has started informing your poetry?
I didn't think it did until a few months ago when I went to a slam, and as I was performing as a feature poet, and as I was performing, one of my old teammates came up to me and was like, I can definitely see like the stand up in your poetry now. And I was like, what do you mean? And he was like, you're very intentional about your pauses and you're much more relaxed on stage. And it seems like you know exactly what's coming, in like the kind of like chill, quiet confidence that I've associated with a lot of comics sometimes. I don't know. I feel like it's just forced me to be a lot more relaxed on stage and to not take myself so seriously. Because when I first started doing poetry, I took myself very seriously. And comedy has literally forced me to lighten up. So that's something I've definitely taken from my poetry into from my comedy into my poetry. And it's something I really value.
Can you do a reading?
Oh, of like a poem right now?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, sure. Let me pull up something from my Google Drive. Since we're talking about stripping, let me do that stripping joke, or that stripping poem. So this poem first started out as like a quick draft that turned into a suite of like 3 very related poems about stripping. I shouldn't do a disclaimer. I should just read it. So you know when you're working in a full nude strip club, but you're on your period, so you gotta shake your fully naked ass while hiding the fact you have a tampon jammed so far up your cooter you can taste the bloody cotton in your mouth? Yeah. Me neither. So I get off the stage and a customer tips me, tells me that he loves my breasts, and I say thanks, because after 3 years of this job, it's still a weird compliment. I don't tell him how I'm saving up to cut them off. I don't know how to thank someone for loving a body I do not want. I smile when he calls me she, sip my cocktail to mask the taste of blood in my mouth. He runs a hand up my thigh, says I am a beautiful girl, says I am a girl. He grins, and I watch him turn into animal, meaning man. I've never been so jealous. My high school bully walks into the strip club as I am on stage, fully nude, and this is not the first time I've felt naked around him, so imagine my surprise when he doesn't recognize me. I no longer have braces. I am all bare teeth. I have lost the flat chest of childhood, my hips grown wide like the woman I've never been, and maybe it is this that makes him lick his lips. I am a different meal than I once was, but he's still the animal I've always known him to be. He rains his rent on my naked body. and I hold the word payback behind my teeth. My rapist walks into the strip club 2 weeks after he made a meal of me, and this is the part where I wish I could tell you that I was unbothered, that I took all his money, that I danced like my body was still mine, but I didn't. I ran into the back room and hid, and I think this is how my breasts must feel every day when I put on my binder, flattened, out of breath, wishing themselves away, but I don't cry. And maybe that's how I knew I was never a girl. I process trauma like my father, become stone, gritted teeth, wear my PTSD like he wore his dog tag under his shirt, hidden away. But that's the thing about this job. I have nowhere to hide when I am naked.
Dang!
Thank you. Yeah. It's definitely one of my favorite poems.
When did you write that?
I actually wrote that this year. It's one of my most recent poems. I performed it in competition for the first time at Rust Belt this year on final stage, which was such an honor. Like, there is no community of poets I would have rather shared that piece with, because it talks about all the things that are most difficult for me to talk about. It's easy for me to talk about stripping in front of my friends, and it's easy for me to talk about being non-binary in front of my friends. But it's difficult for me to talk about both those things together, because a lot of times when you're performing femininity as a profession, people just assume that you want to be feminine and assume that you want to be a girl. And it's for that reason that I've always been very grateful of, like, the name that we all have in stripping, right? Like, our stripper names, because it allows me to compartmentalize a lot of that and sort of, like, turn that into a character. And it's something that I put on when I go to work and I take off when I come out of it. But the thing that I can't take off when I come out of work is the body that I was assigned. And it's sort of this constant reminder of the burden of a biology that you didn't select for yourself. So it was out of needing to be able to talk about having both those parts of my identity at once that I wrote that poem. And the beginning of that poem ended up being a short bit that I would use to transition into talking about stripping in my sets, where I would ask a person about what the most annoying thing at their job is, and then I would counter by saying, like, yeah, don't you find it so annoying when you're shaking your ass in a fully nude strip club, but you're on your period, so you have to shake your fully naked ass while hiding the fact you have a tampon jammed so over up your cooter. You remember the rest. So it's just like this incredibly vivid and uncomfortable picture. And that's kind of what the mood of the rest of the poem is a vivid and uncomfortable picture of these two identities intersecting.
So can you describe the moment when you were making the switch from poetry to comedy?
So a big part of it was my really dear friend, Mary Jane French, who was a comic in the Richmond area. She was getting close to when she was about to move out to LA to start pursuing comedy out there. And it was just one of those summer nights when we were hanging out, and she and I went out to Scuffletown Park. And I mentioned that I had been thinking about doing comedy for some time, and that I'd been sitting on, like, my first 5 minutes of material for a while. And she just listened to me and listened to my work, and she was like, okay, like, when do you want to start? Let's go to Mojo's next Tuesday so you can get your first mic out of the way. And that was kind of it. I'd been sitting on some work for a little while. It wasn't good work. Like, it wasn't a good first 5 minutes, but it was, like, adequate. And it's been, that's basically been it since then. I've just been going out to mics and trying out new material and trying really hard to make people laugh.
What advice would you give to people who want to get in the comedy scene or in the poetry scene?
I mean, just do it. Just hit up an open mic, talk to the people in the community. Anyone who wants to try it, just go out and do it. The first night that you do it is always going to be the scariest, and then when you do that, you realize it's never really all that hard.
And what advice would you give to people who want to get into stripping?
Expect it to be harder than you imagine. Brace yourself, because every day requires a lot of mental strength. Even when it doesn't feel like it in the moment, you will feel it after work, or after a week of working or 2 weeks, especially if you don't take care of yourself. Take care of your body as if you're an old person. Like when you have days off of work, just bathe in lotion, because your body's going to need it after shifts of not wearing it on the pole. Take lots of Epsom salt baths, especially after a long shift at work. And stretch. Oh, for the love of God, just stretch. But yeah, also just be kind and respectful and always ask before doing anything at the strip club, especially if you're new, because every club is different. Every dancer is different. Everyone has different boundaries and limits and what they're okay with. And while you should be friendly, don't be overbearing when you first start, because that is the quickest way to get people to be suspicious of you or to be annoyed with you. And those are two things you do not want to be in a strip club.
Can you describe some of your upcoming projects and things that you're excited for?
Yes. So I'm working on 2 chapbooks right now. One is a short collection of poems about stripping, which is one that I am not going to be telling my parents about for a minute. But it's definitely a labor of love, and sort of just like both a book of experiences that I've had with stripping and also a book of praises for like the people that I've met through that work and the small miracles that happen during the job, because there are a lot of moments in the club that do feel like very small miracles. And the other is a collection of poetry about the idea of heredity and inheritance in ways that are not entirely material. So the things that we inherit from our parents, especially like trauma and mental illness, and the ways that those cycles play out in families generation after generation, and what our individual responsibility is to do our best to end those cycles, if that makes sense.
No, definitely.
And where can people find you on the interwebs?
So they can find me at @ghostpressman on Twitter, which is definitely my most informal web presence. They can also find my poetry page, AM Pressman, on Facebook. They can email me at ampressmanpoetry@gmail.com for any booking questions or inquiries about upcoming projects or workshops or anything like that.
Keep it going for Pressman, everybody!
So I'm non-binary. I use they, them pronouns. Thank you. It's always an awkward topic to broach. It's basically just a long-form way of letting y'all know that I have a fucked up relationship with my own genitals. But conversely, I'm like super into other people's genitals, right? Like, recently got very into sucking dick, gave it the old college try. And I like sucking dick not because penises are more fun than vaginas, but because when I suck dick, I play this little game in my head where I pretend that I'm Kirby from Super Smash Bros. And then it's mine. For those of us in the back, I pretended the mic was my penis.
Hey, thank you so much for tuning in, and thank you, Pressman, for coming on to the show. I'm Dominique, and this is Exhibition. Until next time.